All right, so welcome back, everyone. That was our 20th century review of public space analysis. And what we're going to talk about now are present day tools for public space analysis. We're going to go back to New York City, where there is a very well-respected nonprofit organization called the Project for Public Spaces that has developed this infographic that planners and citizens can use to analyze a specific space. And if you want more information, you can go to their website, www.pps.org. So there are 4 key elements that the Project for Public Spaces has identified in the way that they analyze spaces. So we'll start here with sociability. And I'm sorry, before I move on, I should say, if you look right in the middle of the slide, you'll see 3 shades of red. The darkest one, key attributes, the middle, intangibles, and the third, or the outer radius, measurements. So with sociability, the way that PPS proposes to measure the degree of success of sociability in a space is through the number of women, children, and elderly, social networks or people that know one another in that space, events of volunteerism, evening use, and street life. So street life is somewhat similar to what William White was analyzing as well. These intangibles, or the adjectives that could describe a space that tells you that it's a sociable space, are then described in the middle part of the circle, such as pride, neighborly, cooperative, welcoming, and interactive. So when you're in a public space, you can be thinking to yourself both about how would I describe this space and what data do I see, can I observe or collect about this space that will let me know that it's sociable. Uses and activities. Again, this outer ring is more of data and measurement collection. So you can look at the number of local businesses that operate their own businesses in the area. Land use patterns. Is this a homogeneous area where it's only homeownership and residential homes? Or is it only full of shopping malls? Or is there a variety of land uses in that area? Property values. Is it an exclusively luxury area? Is it an urban slum? Or is there a mix? Rent levels is somewhat similar. How much do you know of people paying in the area? And then retail sales. How bustling is the shopping? And then once you've thought about these different elements, you can think to yourself, well, how would I describe this space? And the superlatives that you'd use to describe a successful space might include vital, active, celebratory, or perhaps sustainable, because there's a mix of land use patterns, a mix of property values and rental levels. So that's the uses and activities element. The third element is comfort and image, and you might use things such as crime statistics, sanitation rating, building conditions, and environmental data. And as you're observing and collecting this type of data, words you might use to describe that place include attractive, historic, clean, walkable. And William White might also say, well, is it sittable? And you can see the moving chairs actually in these graphics in the lower right-hand corner. And then finally, we have access and linkages, which is basically about public transportation. So you might look at the traffic data and see how congested it is or what times of day are peak times. Mode splits is an engineering term that's used to identify how long it takes people to pass through a particular point on the street. Transit usage can be tracked. For example, the MTR, because you swipe in and then you swipe out, they can know which stations have the highest usage and at what times of day, and how far most people are traveling between stations. Pedestrian activity is again similar to what William White discussed in his video. Where are people on the street? Where are they sitting and where are they congregating? And then parking use patterns. If there are cars, of which there are actually very few in Hong Kong, where are they and at what times of day is parking in highest demand? And all of this leads to the ability to access these public spaces. And so how connected is this place? How walkable? How convenient? And in general, how accessible? Other things that I might add to this is the term accessible. So how accessible are these places for young children, the elderly, strollers, wheelchairs, and other things like that? I might also add, in addition to parking usage patterns, bicycle usage patterns. Perhaps not in Hong Kong, but in other cities where bicycling might be more popular, such as Boston, where I'm from. So those are the Project for Public Spaces key elements that they look at, and they have many more resources on their website, which I encourage you to look at. But there's another way to think about analyzing social spaces, and that comes from an initiative called the Hong Kong Public Space Initiative that I found online. And they've created a different graphic to identify how public space can be analyzed and used. And if you want to find more information and see some of the projects that the Hong Kong Public Space Initiative has worked on, you can go to their website at www.hkpsi.org. And so the graphic that they've put together says that the foundation of quality and successful public space is accessibility. Can you get to that place at all, and who can get to that place? And that would come before all other factors. Once there's that foundation of being able to access that space, then what might come next is the environment and the facilities. So what types of facilities are available? Are there public toilets? Is there Wi-Fi, especially in the 21st century, that people might want to use? And is the environment clean? Are there trees? How green and sustainable and kind of welcoming is that environment from a facilities and infrastructure perspective? If it's accessible and there are adequate facilities, then step 3 or tier 3 would be public utilization. And so to what degree are there people using this space, whether for pleasure or out of need? And then finally, if people can access it, if there is sufficient infrastructure and people are using it, to what degree are they actually interacting with one another and being welcoming towards strangers or respectful of space? So this is a different way of thinking about public space, and there are probably many, many more. These are just 2. And from the Hong Kong Public Space Initiative, they've identified 3 dimensions that you can keep in mind when you're analyzing a public space and the users of that space. So there's the individual dimension, which is essentially an extension of your personal living area. Many of the apartments in Hong Kong, I understand, are quite small, and so a lot of socializing and in particular recreation occurs outdoors. And so public space is often used for these types of purposes. But in addition, it might also be used as the community dimension, and it might be the extension of our living room. If we want to have larger gatherings like barbecues per se, that might happen in public spaces on the beach or in parks, where you can get together not only with your family, but also perhaps with your neighbors and friends. So the community dimension. And then finally, there's the city dimension, which might do some of the following things, such as act as a buffer to high density development, showcase the arts and cultural essence of communities, and be a platform for citizens to share opinions. And then finally, beyond individual citizens, when tourists come and other businesses want to operate in the city, they might advertise at the city dimension level to supplement the economy. So those are some 21st century ways of analyzing public space. And what I want to do now is discuss who is actually doing this analysis and why that's important. So public space and public engagement. The concept of right to the city started in the United States but has expanded rapidly around the world. And it's the idea that as more and more people move into cities, they should have the right to shape the way and I'll discuss David Harvey in a moment, shape the way that the city can work for them and meet their needs and not just be developed for them, but with them. And this is the ideas of democracy, human rights, land ownership, urban justice. You can go to www.righttothecity to learn more about this growing international movement about urban planning and public space redevelopment. And so David Harvey is one of the intellectual leaders of the movement. He's a professor at the City University of New York, which is a public university, and he's a professor of anthropology and geography. And he believes that the right to the city is not only the right to live there or inhabit the city, but it is also the right to shape living environments according to one's needs and wishes. Again, the city development shouldn't happen to you, he argues, but should happen with you. And there are some new ways that we in the United States, and in particular at MIT, are trying to move in this direction. So, for example, from my department, we have an alumnus named James Rojas who has created a consulting firm called Placeit. And you can go online and read more about this, but essentially what he does is he's hired by local communities and mayors to come and lead workshops with citizens that live in neighborhoods that are under consideration for redevelopment, to engage them in an exercise of visioning what they would want for the city. And so he'll bring colorful blocks and other objects that they can use to build their own city according to their best wishes and dreams. The Project for Public Spaces has also developed a ethos or motto called Lighter, Quicker, Cheaper, LQC. And the goal of this is to use inexpensive, incremental interventions, such as these very light, temporary, disposable chairs that you see in this image of Times Square, New York City, to push forward faster than might otherwise happen local citizens' vision for an area. So this is Times Square years ago, at least in 2000, before 2010, more than 5 years ago. And in Times Square, cars used to be allowed to pass through, but citizens felt that it was dangerous for pedestrians and especially the tourists that came through. And so they worked with city government to propose that Times Square be closed down completely to traffic. And the city started with cheap and inexpensive chairs to test out or pilot or experiment with this idea. And when they saw that it would be successful, they've now officially shut down the city and have purchased more expensive, higher quality chairs and actually invested in the idea. But they started with a lighter, quicker, cheaper intervention. Other ways in the US that folks are involved in public space redevelopment and visioning is through a day called Parking Day or pop-up projects. So to the left, you see an image of a couple on a swing set on a city street. That is part of an initiative called Parking Day. And actually, let me write out for you so you understand what I mean by this. Parking Day. And the goal is to get cars off of the street and reclaim that space for public use. And to give you a few more examples of what people are doing on Parking Day, is they're setting up gardens and playing music. They're having water bars. This is in front of Cambridge City Hall where MIT is located. They're putting up models, benches, gardens. They're getting very creative about how they want to use their public space, and it's become an annual event of recreating and reusing these public spaces. Now for Parking Day, it's just temporary, but in some cases, pop-ups, such as this pop-up patio, can become permanent. So here you can see that this is just a pop-up patio and cafe, but I've known cases, again in New York City, where citizens have worked with business owners to say, we would really like to transform the area in front of your business into a sidewalk cafe, and eventually the business owner applies for a permit and receives permission to make that space a permanent space for his or her business. So sometimes, sometimes, but not always, these temporary interventions can lead to permanent changes. The way that we're doing public space engagement at the Media Lab is through a specific lab called the Changing Places Lab. And most recently, we led a project, and one of my classmates, Phil Tin, spearheaded this project to work with local residents of a neighborhood called Dudley Square in the heart of Boston to plan for bus rapid transit, or BRT. And you can see in the image to the right the group of students that helped develop this software and IT program. And what they did is they created a multi-scale public interaction experience so that the public can be intimately involved with how the bus rapid transit could be developed with the residents and with the city planners. So at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a screen, and you can see an image of the screen to your right. And those are citizens that can move the locations of the bus routes and see how that affects travel times and transfers. And then in the middle area where there are actually Legos, that's where the scale model is. And so more than just seeing it in 2D, you could see in 3D how the different locations of the bus stations and where they would be and the density that would follow would affect the built environment. And then finally, in the upper right-hand corner is just one section of one bus stop station and how the user experience would be using that bus system. And these are images of the other two places. You already saw the screen, and then to the left is the Lego 3D model, and to the right is specifically where the bus stop would be, right in there in that center island. And the professor that's leading this initiative, Chris Zegras, believes that our ultimate objective is this idea of co-creation, or the planners and traffic engineers working with the public. He believes that having producers and consumers work together in the production of a good creates a better good. So this idea of co-creation, I really want you to remember and consider in our work for this next 2 weeks in the summer camp and in your careers in the future. So what we've discussed today is 20th century planning, public space planning analysis and tools, 21st century approaches, and then how we can engage the public in the co-creation of these public spaces using some of those tools. So hopefully this has been new information for you, and I look forward to seeing you all either tomorrow afternoon or on Wednesday to get some of your feedback on some of these ideas that we presented, and then see you all use them, incorporate them in your presentations next week. So thanks, and I hope you guys have a great day. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. There's one thing I forgot, and I haven't stopped recording. This is a video of visualizing the bus stops as it goes through the city. And the way the traffic would flow. So let me just show that to you one more time because it's a very short clip. All right, and that is all for me, so I will end.